So some of you may have heard of Father Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He's a Franciscan priest and the founder, director of the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque. And on Saturdays, he does a summary of the previous 6 days of devotions, Sunday through Friday. And he has a theme for each week. And his theme for last week was pertinent to what we're doing in meeting Christianity again for the first time. He takes on original sin directly with the clever phrase, original blessing, as a starting point for looking at Christianity, as opposed to original sin. If you start with original sin, you're going to have a structure and an outcome that's different than if you start with original blessing. Now, he didn't come up with the phrase original blessing. It was from Father Matthew Fox, Roman Catholic priest who became an Episcopal priest, who is still with us in California, of course. And he has written an entire theological perspective on what he calls creation spirituality. Hello, Chuck, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Anyway, Richard Rohr's daily devotions last week were all about what does it mean to start one's spiritual life theological perspective with a positive story rather than with a problem. Significant question, right? So I'm just going to show you a couple summaries of his weekly devotions. Maybe before we go there, I invite you to be comfortable, to take some deep breaths, to be mindful of your surroundings, your chair, your neighbors, your breathing, your heartbeat, various concerns on your mind, random thoughts and emotions, and to be centered in this moment. So for last Sunday, we could go today, and Monday, here were the simple summaries of his daily devotions to give you an idea. So you get the idea of where he's going for the week. I won't show you the other ones. But then on Saturday, he doesn't give a devotion as such. He gives a practice. He suggests a practice, a contemplative exercise for expanding one's awareness of the Spirit based on his theme for the week. So I thought this practice would be a helpful devotion for us today. This morning on Being, some of you have listened to On Being from Krista Tippett on NPR at 7 a.m. every Sunday morning. Her guests today were Padraig Otuma and someone else. Padraig Otuma is a theologian and a poet. In fact, he has a weekly podcast on poetry and theology, spirituality. And Padraig Otuma this morning said, the body is the biggest source of shame for many of us. The body is our biggest source of shame. And remember, original sin in the traditional Christian teaching, which is Catholic and Protestant, by the way. Don't blame the Catholics. Original sin, how is original sin passed on from generation to generation? How is original sin passed on from generation to generation in St. Augustine's theory? Maybe Protestants aren't, through sex. Don't say it. Don't think it. Don't do it. Well, under very limited circumstances. So from the beginning, Christianity, it's been argued, has had a negative view of the body. And we've carried it right through to today. That's an argument that makes Christianity problematic for a lot of people. So Padraig Otuma, Richard Rohr, and then the author of this blessing, her name is Jan. She's a United Methodist minister. What's her name there? Jan. Yeah, thank you, Richardson. Here's a blessing of the body as we begin our session today. And just read this to yourself and bless your body quietly, silently. Bless your body as you read this devotion.
Difficult to see with the lights overhead.
Let's try to cut them.
Agreed. Thank you.
Can you read it to us?
Is it still hard to see?
Yes, but I'm at a terrible angle. I'm at a 10.
That's interesting. There's a better angle here. I could probably spend time enlarging it, but that's not time I want to spend.
Okay.
So Jan Richardson suggests this blessing. This blessing takes one look at you, and all it can say is holy. Holy hands. Holy face. Holy feet. Holy everything in between. Holy even in pain. Holy even when weary. In brokenness, holy. In shame, holy still. Holy in delight. Holy in distress. Holy when being born. Holy when we lay it down at the hour of our death. So, friend, open your eyes, holy eyes. For one moment, see what this blessing sees. This blessing that knows how you have been formed and knit together in wonder and love. Welcome this blessing that folds its hands in prayer when it meets you. Receive this blessing that wants to kneel in reverence before you. You who are temple, sanctuary, home for God in this world. And here's each week's practice is accompanied by a 30-second or at the most 1 minute video devotion. And I'm sorry for the advertisement. It will only last about 3 seconds. What is that like for you?
What, the hands in the sands of the poem?
This experience. I'm asking in part because I've now read and transcribed 16 or 17 pages, single-spaced worth of your wonderful responses from last week. And a lot of you indicated prayer and meditation as something you're interested in. So we just did prayer and meditation. What is that like for you?
It makes me realize that I'm in touch with my whole self. How long has it been since I felt that sand? I couldn't get over that. It's been a long time. But the memory.
So for a lot of people, we're taught that Christianity is about beliefs, right? Well, what about our hearts? What about our physicality?
I've always had a wry, W-R-Y, feeling. I don't know when it started, but During my early growing up years, Carl Lundquist, who eventually became head of the Lutheran World Federation, was my confirmation pastor right out of seminary. He built the church up magnificently, almost shutting its doors down too far. But somehow his sermons, which never used the word I, his approach to things made such sense that things that in scriptures, and we read, we had awards. I read the Bible cover to cover and got a little award. Some stuff didn't make sense to me, and the way he approached Christianity helped me along on that. Without really verbalizing it somehow. By the time I was a full-blown adult, I was more comfortable here than in rather circumspect approaches.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Somehow we have evolved to consider that this perspective on body and all makes sense.
By the way, Father Richard Rohr, you may think, how can you be a Catholic and question original sin? Some of Father Richard's writings have come under scrutiny, but he has a way of incorporating original sin, which he would better explain than I can, that helps us maybe understand how it puts us more in solidarity with one another and our obvious forgetfulness of our divine nature, right? If we are created in the likeness and image of God from the get-go, original blessing, don't we tend to kind of forget that for different reasons? And he thinks of that forgetfulness, which is similar to Sufi teachings, Sufi Islam teachings about the need to always remember the blessings of God. But in Christianity too, he says, it's just human. It's not Christian, Muslim, or anything else. We tend to forget our blessedness and the need to come back, He says might be what Augustine and then all the later teachers meant by original sin. It's that tendency to forget who we are, our dignity, our worth, our value, body, mind, and spirit. I want to thank you all for the blessing you gave me this week to read and transcribe your responses from last week. You are an amazing bunch of people, and I'm not just pandering to my audience. You gave a rich, honest, vulnerable response to every question. And to call it soup to nuts, that's not enough flavors in the pantry. It was a rich variety, a blessed variety of responses to those questions. And because I've transcribed them, almost all of them, I'm going to give them back to you for your reflection today as we have our session today and also for next week. But I can do that while I'm getting us going on the next exercise. So the purpose of 2 weeks ago today, and last week and today, these 3 weeks, is to gather what you want and need for the next 14 weeks. Okay? And I'm going to be reading and rereading all these responses you gave last week, and even the week before, we did one written response, and there's one more today. And last week, we had 5 questions. Today, it's only 4. Thanks be to God. Are you excited? Vince and I have had some conversation. By the way, over here, if you want the handout from 2 weeks ago, which kind of set the basis, it's here. If you want last week's questions, they're here. And today, take one down and pass it around. Yeah, there's another phrase. Here you go. And I got something for you to write on, too. And you can either write on that tab or you can just use that tab. Yep. You can either write on that tab or you can just use the pad for balancing. No names are needed.
Okay.
So you have very interesting handwriting.
My handwriting is definitely.
That's a nice way to put it. Oops, I took two.
And I think you all go back to those days when handwriting was like a course in school, right?
The Palmer method.
Oh, I thought it was Zaner Bloser. Do you remember Zaner Bloser? Did I make that up? So you at home, I'm going to show you the questions so you can also participate, of course. By the way, I'm giving you back. Yeah, I'm giving you back your responses from last week. And some of the handwriting was a little indecipherable. And where it's indecipherable, I have circled it in red. The old teacher in me. Doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means I can't read it. Let me share here, share screen. Let me share here. So there's 4 questions, but actually they're in pairs. So the first 2 have to do with naming a positive or neutral aspect of Christianity that you definitely want us to cover in the next 14 weeks. Now, by positive and neutral, I mean 2 things. One is from your perspective, not objectively. I mean, objectively, there's no, how do we arrive at that? This is your perspective. By positive, I mean emotionally. What is something you already like about Christianity that you would definitely like us to go deeper in? Neutral, I mean, like maybe you don't have a strong positive or negative feeling about it, but it still interests you enough that you want us to go deep into. Question 2 asks the methods. If you have any ideas about how to explore this together, I would appreciate your suggestions. If not, I mean, I'll come up with something, but maybe you have a brilliant suggestion for how to do that topic. And then questions 3 and 4, I'll go back to 1 and 2 for those at home in a moment. So those of you at home, like last week, please grab a piece of paper and pen and so on and jot down some responses here. So questions 3 and 4 get at the problematic aspects of Christianity. So 3 and 4 ask the same questions as 1 and 2. So 3 and 4 are about a problematic aspect of Christianity. Name a problematic aspect of Christianity. Yeah, I'll bring those around if you want. Yeah, it's good. Name a problematic or difficult aspect of Christianity that you definitely want us to cover in the next 14 weeks. And again, this is problematic or difficult from your perspective. And number 4, if you have any ideas how to do this, like maybe you know a professor or maybe you know somebody who somehow knows about this, or maybe you've seen something on YouTube, or you know a book about this thing. Mention it. If not, I can work my networks and we can come up with something better. Okay, I'm going to go back to 1 and 2 for the sake of people at home. Welcome to the to the bell ringers. So glad to see you all. Is that your name now?
I think you need T-shirts.
Yeah, you need T-shirts. So we're just going to take time now for writing. Any questions?
So
about the assignment?
I probably was not paying attention.
That's all right.
About the positive or neutral aspect of Christianity. What are you asking for there?
So number 1 is asking for something about Christianity that you like, that attracts you to this faith. emotionally positive for you. But it's so interesting to you, you'd like to go deeper in the next 14 weeks. Your responses last week were so broad, wonderfully broad, that I need to kind of start to focus. Because 14 weeks cannot do the Christian faith justice. It'll be fun, but I'm looking to address your interests. Because the whole goal of this Meeting Christianity Again for the first time is to help you reclaim, re-embrace Christianity, to come to terms with the historic faith in a way that works for you. But I need to know what sparks your interest and also what blocks your, what makes it difficult for you to put your arms around this faith. I hope so. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Am I finished? I know.
I'm not accustomed to writing when someone else is speaking.
I appreciate it.
Especially somebody of your level.
I appreciate your honesty. It's so fun.
Well, isn't that kind of accomplishments?
Good idea.
I saw the red. I did read part of it. I did read it.
It's really good.
To you, just okay, great. If it's okay, I'd like to go ahead and address some questions that came up 2 weeks ago and even this week, having to do with sort of why we're doing this, which is a great question. 2 weeks ago, somebody said in our circle, I was talking about what are the building blocks that you have, or I didn't use that phrase. It's sort of, I think I used the metaphor of the Django game. It's like Jenga. That some of us have Losi, would it be better if we dim the lights for you a little bit? I don't want to sit in complete darkness though.
It's the way I am.
If they do dim,
I've got A and B, and boy,
that's pretty dim.
Is that too dim?
I think it might be. There, how's that for a compromise? Lois Eve, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll remember to wear revisers.
Okay. So the question was sort of, I had pictured that we have this framework in our minds called Christianity, and that if you take one piece of at the bottom out, then the whole thing can collapse, and that can be how it is for our faith journeys. That for some of us, maybe we started to question the Bible. Well, the Bible was pretty foundational. Pull it out, it's like the whole thing comes down the house of cards. And a very important comment was made. So like, what if we don't have many blocks to start with? Meaning, what if our knowledge base is pretty minimal? It occurred to me, I always have my better thoughts after I talk to somebody. Does that happen to you? I think a lot of us have a lot more knowledge of Christianity than we may think we have. But we don't think we have much because maybe, we haven't done a class like this, or, maybe didn't take a class in high school or college or graduate school about Christianity. And I think the reason we have more intuitive knowledge of Christianity is because we've been hanging around it for a very long time, all of us. You know something about baptism. Even if you never read a book about it, you know something about communion. You know something about the life and the mission of a local church. You have some ideas about God, Jesus, etc. In other words, I think you know more than you think you know. What do you think about what I just said?
Depends on the atmosphere in which you were raised. There are people I have met who never went to church nor did.
Right.
And I met them in covenant living. They grew up and one became a Pakistani missionary.
But did not grow up in the church.
No clue at all.
That's a very good point, Lois Eve. Not everybody grew up in the church.
That's right.
And so, and yet, you've had some impressions of the Christian faith through what? What your friends say and relatives and what you see on TV and so on. I mean, Christianity is a pretty pervasive cultural phenomenon in the United States of America, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes. They know about that
Right.
it exists.
You have some impressions of it, rightly, wrongly, and so on.
Yeah.
And the reason a lot of people just reject Christianity completely without ever checking it out is they have some very negative feelings about it just based on watching the news, that Christians are narrow-minded.
Who depends on who you meet.
Yes.
That is or is not a Christian. What
Yes.
they say. Early impressions, gut reaction. There you go.
Right. Can't make a first impression twice.
Yeah, right.
So what's the popular view of Christianity by a lot of nuns, people who are just, they either checked out or they never checked in the first place. Christianity is narrow-minded and bigoted, especially on LGBTQ issues, quite frankly. LGBTQ plus issues and science, anything having to do with science, evolution, and so on, and tolerance of other faiths. This is the impression. So why would I ever want to go there? But a lot of us who did grow up in the church, we have a fairly broad knowledge base already, more than you may think you know. So that's a response. Do you have any response to my response? Nobody's experienced.
We all want to know more.
Right.
Yeah, we know something.
Yeah.
There's gaps, there's questions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. That's the other thing. This wasn't a really question that came up, but it occurred to me that a lot of lay people especially have not gone into some areas of Christian thought and practice and history as maybe some clergy have. And I don't mean to separate clergy and laity so completely and absolutely, but there are areas that a lot of Christians don't know about, but is very much part of the Christian faith. So an example is contemplation. The Christian mystical tradition is unknown to a lot of people, especially Protestants, but even Catholics too, who just go to Mass, come home, go to Mass, come home. You may hear the priest or the pastor occasionally talk about some of the great mystical figures in the church, like Mechtild and Julian of Norwich, St. John of the Cross. You may have hear these references, but do they ever proceed from there to actual prayer practices that are anything other than saying the Lord's Prayer once a day, which is fine. There's a rich Christian contemplative tradition that I didn't even study until recently. And it's the Orthodox Church that I'm pointing at Greg. Greg's father is Orthodox, right?
Yep.
The Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, but especially the Orthodox Church, has kept that contemplative, Holy Spirit-based, experiential-based aspect of Christianity alive for 2,000 years in a way that mainline Protestants we've never really emphasized. So there are bits and pieces of Christianity that are there to be uncovered. Yeah, by all of us. Another question that came up a couple of weeks ago is, what if one day I feel this and another day I feel this and I don't know what I think? I mean, not feel, but think. One day I think this, another day I think this. Then I hope these next 14 weeks will give you options that will either further confuse you or help you synthesize. And reclaim a foundation for yourself in Christianity. I'm not trying to push Christianity. It's just we are in a Christian church. And if our foundation is so wobbly if our foundation is on basic things like who is Jesus, and we only know like a couple of options rather than multiple options, then we'll always be toggling back and forth between these two options. Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Well, who or what is God? So there's a way, I hope, in the next 14 weeks that will provide some additional options for you. And you may say, you may have a little breakthrough, a little aha, so that you come to terms with some of these nagging issues that have been with you. And yet it could be like, well, before there were just 2 options. Now there's 10. Like, what do I do with that? Another question that came up was, why look back in our life? As I asked you to do in questions 1 and 2, and maybe, 1 and 2 last week, I gave them back to you. I was hoping that you would start sort of from the beginning of your faith journey until now and look ahead so that you could get a sense of what was there and then what was not there and is still kind of up in the air for you, to get a sense of the arc of your life of faith, to get a sense of, oh, that's why when I hear a Sermon on the Mount, it inspires me. It's because when I was a kid, my pastor said, if you want to know something about Christianity, the Sermon on the Mount, that's all you need to know. It's helping you make connections of things that are there, but also maybe name some of the gaps. And I think we have to go all the way back to our earliest memories of the faith to kind of look at ourselves today. So those are some questions that came up. I hope that it's helpful. How were these experiences for you? All that writing you did last week and today?
Well, when one is participating physically and mentally on their own, it's much more dramatic than sitting listening to somebody else or watching something on a screen. So
yeah, well, I want these weeks to be interactive.
You know, in small groups or even individual calls like this are much more, well, they're active.
And I will ask you to turn those in today, and I'm going to add them to the ever-growing stew of concerns. Any other, as you look back on what you wrote last week, what you wrote today, what is stirring in you?
Well, it was a contemplative thing to do. I was sitting at my desk, thinking about those questions and looking at my childhood, a series of epiphanies, basically, when I learned a little bit more, or I was thinking about answers to questions I hadn't considered before. And looking back on it now, at this age, the epiphanies shouldn't end just because I'm a grown-up. I'm going to continue learning. And it was nice to remember how those initial ideas were implanted in a kid's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful.
Some of you had very positive experiences growing up, religion-wise. Some of you had more narrow presentations of the faith. And almost all of you, not all, but almost all of you said independent thinking was not a part of your experience growing up. I use the phrase critical thinking. Maybe I should have used independent thinking. Critical thinking sounds like you're required to come up with something negative. I mean, thinking for yourself.
how capable is the average person under 18?
Right.
It strikes me that it's an unlikely trait for people who are,
Yeah.
not exclusively, because there are people who are much more mature than the average person.
Right. So there are some precocious children, right? But your average child is maybe not capable of much abstract thinking until what age is that?
Well, it varies.
It varies, right?
Wildly,
Right. Probably not 7, but
some people never achieve.
yeah. So I attended a church school seminar once where the presenter said, yeah, you're going to get wide range of abilities to think creatively at that age and emotional maturity to actually ask a question and linguistic ability to actually put it into words effectively, right? But if you're teaching a Bible story, this presenter said, you rather than saying this is what happened and this is what it means, and this is how you should live, therefore, preaching a mini sermon to the first graders, you can start at a very young age to say, what do you think about this? You can begin at an early age to foster independent thinking.
Yeah, we shouldn't be afraid that someone's going to come up with some thought that maybe you are incapable of addressing or whatever. And that you have to adhere to the strict things. So yeah, encouraging children to think and react. It's a good thing. Maybe we want to bring the remote people back.
Yes, remote people, thank you. We want to see you. There you are. Thank you, Paul, for reminding me.
And I think that's important, what Paul just said, just because a lot of churches, they do have like a children's time. It allows kids to like say, what's on their mind, be it right. It's not either right or wrong, but it's like, it's kind of interesting to see some of the things, what they come up with if you give them a concept and then they respond on that. And, as a kid, they think creatively in some ways, but it may not be what you would think. But when you think about what they say, well, maybe I thought that
Out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah.
Yeah, boys and girls, what's brown and has a bushy tail and loves to eat nuts and a little child raises their hand and says, I know, Jesus. And the pastor says, well, obviously it's a squirrel. Why did you say Jesus? And the child says, it's because that's always the answer to every question we ask.
I had a young man who, in his early teenage years, said, when is it that all the adults are going to sit up in front and they can answer silly questions and we can laugh at them?
Referring to the German evangelical and Reformed tradition in the United Church of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Where on the Sunday before Palm Sunday, traditionally, right, the confirmands are lined up in front of the congregation and asked, Catechism question 32, go. Can you recite the 10 Commandments? Yes, we do. No, exactly. That's the point. Why do we put our children through this experience of anti-grace when we would never do that to an adult? Any other, yes, Flurry?
I was just going to say that it sounds like what we do when people, immigrants become American citizens. I haven't seen the booklet or whatever that they have to study, but I think most of us would be hard pressed to explain different parts of the Constitution or say what was the X amendment or, I think I'm not saying they shouldn't know, but I think very few of us had that specific instruction in our country.
Right, right. Basic knowledge, yeah. What else was stirring in you as you answered the questions last week and today?
Appreciation, from my standpoint. Appreciation. I felt very appreciative of my early childhood and the strength given to me by particularly my mother, who spent an enormous amount of time, but also my early religious education, which was rather unusual because I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Albert Schweitzer, but you know, that's what was in, you know, from his pathway. The people who worked with him were in the pulpit, and our minister sailed a boat in the South Pacific to test. It's called the Golden Rule to test the atomic testing. So I mean, that's kind of unusual because most people. But I think
yeah, a lot of you were very appreciative in your comments about your early exposure to religion. Even as you recognized you didn't get an adult dose. But as Paul just said, adult doses aren't appropriate always, you know, not even in confirmation class, because confirmands are have very undeveloped brains and intellects and emotional lives. They're developing, but they're not adult yet. I'd be glad to have your responses today. Keep last week's. And Nancy, I do need yours from last week because I haven't recorded it yet. It's in here. Thank you. Great. So I don't know where we're going next week. I need to compile today's responses. And I'm actually tempted to just kind of take a tally sheet and say, Bible, prayer, Jesus.
It'd be interesting for all of us to get kind of not all the detail, but kind of an idea of what all was put out over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Paul. I will do that. That takes me to the direction of a tally sheet, which is kind of like an executive summary, perhaps, of these responses. And all of you at home, I also got yours. Thank you. So appreciated. I hope it's helpful for you. We're almost at time. Yes, Chuck?
Would it be possible to think of an organizational structure where at the end there's 2 or 3 sessions left over, or perhaps we changed our mind?
So, another advantage of these 3 weeks of information gathering. Thank you, Chuck. This is very helpful. And I was thinking of this, but thank you for bringing it up. Sharpens the thought. The advantage of having writing exercises at the beginning is then to, at the end, to say, what has shifted? What new questions came up? What answers were addressed in a new way that is actually inspiring and helpful? Or maybe here's a list of all the other religions if you want to, if you're done Christianity after this. Okay, we're at time. Eleanor, did you have
I just wanted to say that really it's sort of like an examination of Christianity today, but where is it going, or where should it go, or how should it go?
Yes, and we do have a church aspect to these 17 weeks, 14 weeks going forward. And that will include the church today. Later in spiritual enrichment this program year, we also have another unit on the church's involvement in the world that's separate from these 14 units, these 14 weeks. So we'll get there.